the campaign, Seeking for That Better Way. So this evening, we aim to reflect on our weekend together and remind ourselves of the hopes for the weekend, the process, and the outcomes which will inform the activities of the network over the coming year. And last year, we embraced the theme of opening doors, inspired by the Jubilee image of welcome and renewal. And that theme continued through the year, culminating with our conference. This Jubilee year calls us to be pilgrims of hope and to restore relationships with God, with one another, and with creation. And we're being called now to live that out in our work as a network and as individuals in our own little groups for the coming year, when we begin to shine a light on all the things we learned when we were opening the doors to refugees and asylum seekers, to those who are victims of trafficking, those who are worried about the cost of living, and all those people who are impacted by the environment and climate change. We were opening the doors then, and in the coming year, we hope to shine a light on all the things we learned. So this evening, we're going to begin with a prayer of commitment, inspired by the wonderful apostolic exhortation of Pope Leo, Dilexi Te. So maybe we could say the prayer together, but it would be good if we could mute ourselves, otherwise we will be distracted by the noise. So maybe if we can all mute ourselves, but yet say together the prayer of commitment. Lord Jesus, you loved us first and called us to love as you do, without boundaries or fear. Stir in us a passion for justice that refuses to rest while any of your children are left behind. May your work echo your mercy, lifting up those forgotten, unheard, or unseen. Teach us to walk with the poor, not as saviors, but as companions on the road to dignity. Give us eyes to recognize your image in every face and courage to defend it wherever it is wounded. Strengthen our resolve to challenge systems of exclusion with truth, compassion, and faith. Let our hearts remain restless until peace and equity dwell among all peoples. Transform our words into actions, and our actions into signs of your kingdom on earth. Bless our community with unity, humility, and hope, that together we may bear your light, and when we grow weary, remind us that to love you is to leave no one behind. Amen.
Amen. Amen. Amen.
So I think that prayer of commitment could be a statement of action for our work for the network and for all our members and partners for the coming year. So now I'm just going to hand over to Brian, who's going to facilitate the rest of the evening. So thank you, Brian.
Thank you indeed, Anne. And maybe we'll start with the end of the conference. At the very end of the conference, we were asked together to try and discern what might be a conference statement that came out of the joint efforts of the conference. And it wasn't just from those gathered on the floors. It wasn't just one particular group or one particular speaker, but it was a message that was coming through from every aspect of the conference, which included maybe the films people had seen, which might have included the Mass and the liturgy, which would have included the children's work, and also to the substance of the workshops that were presented. And there were up to 10 workshops presented on the day. You can see pretty much so many people gathered here on the lawn, if you remember, just to take the photograph with Anne Farr and others. just showing peace with Gaza. And if you remember, we made a particular effort during this time to produce a conference statement, which was published, and we'll show you that in a moment, but also to produce a statement on Gaza, which came out of the conference on Swanwick. Our conference statement read quite, it was quite a straightforward, but quite blunt. A just peace demands more than the absence of war. It insists on justice, dignity, and inclusion for all, built through deep listening, courageous dialogue, and collective action rooted in love. We reject systems that dehumanize and divide, and instead choose a radical hope that serves the common good. Peace is not a slogan. It is a shared responsibility, a daily commitment, and it represents the power of us. This statement was kind of put together with the help of all of those gathered on the Sunday morning when we tried to work out how best to put forward the essence of the 3 days that we spent together in work. Now, there was lots more said, and we captured some of that in other work that we produced a little bit later on. But another part of if you like, the work kind of began on the Friday night, if you remember, when Sister Katrina Alton, I think, who's here on the call, asked us really to consider what it is that breaks your heart. And it was one of the first statements that we heard on the Friday evening. And it was a phrase and a sentence and a question, I suppose, that was posed in every aspect of the contributions that were made by all who turned up at the weekend. It was a question that was rephrased and reframed and reshared and seemed to be in the air like its own, like participating in its own way during the particular conference. And it was one that Katrina mentioned a couple of times, to consider ourselves that we must ask, what is it that breaks your heart? And when we consider that we live in a world where many believe in the inevitability of violence as a means of resolving conflict, that this was one difficulty that seemed to be mentioned again and again, but that as people of faith, we believe that we've been given an alternative model, that we are to put down our sword, to live out the gospel message of justice, peace, and love. We are taught and told and understand and believe that violence is not inevitable, that there is another way. And this is what we were trying to foster and empower each other with during the time. And working together with Pax Christi, the Quaker Truth and Integrity Group at the conference, explored how we build a just peace globally and nationally, and in our own life. When the keynote speakers included Archbishop Rowan Williams, which, if you remember, he didn't turn up and couldn't turn up. And would also Joanna Frew from Rethinking Security. We had all the workshops, we had the Just Fair, as well as other optional activities, some of them purely leisurely, like, for example, the Ceilidh and the music, and there's also the glass of wine. So there were opportunities to reconnect with people, very many of whom you might only bump into from time to time. But then again, many of us do see a lot of the same faces, which is a real comfort too, given that so many people are involved in similar and the same type of work. So we're enthused by our own work. At the end of the conference, we put out a statement, and we spoke about 160 participants who turned up from 17 dioceses, representing justice groups from all over England, really, and Wales, and indeed Ireland, should I say. I must add in Ireland too, because I did come from there. We spoke about the debating and the talking and the chatting, the pledge. We also kind of drew on some of the different contributions that were made. And if you remember, I had mentioned earlier that Rowan Williams was to turn up. And then when he became unwell, there was this frantic move to try and find alternatives for the Friday night and what were we going to do. But it was staring us right in front of our eyes. And Katrina, if you like, and Sister Mary Ann Francalanza also kind of had an interview situation, and the richness of that really set us up for the weekend. It was inspirational in as much as it was the unexpected success of the weekend, but perhaps it shouldn't have been unexpected, but it really did set us up and tee us up very nicely. So it wouldn't be right to say that Rowan Williams wasn't missed, but he mightn't have been missed as much as we thought we were going to miss him. And then on the Saturday morning, we had the round table discussion, if you like. James Truby from the Columbans, if you like, had a group of people, all different ages, all different backgrounds, all speaking about their work and their space and where they're coming from. And we remember Buchani who was the artist from Operation Noah, speaking about doing peace in community. And then Joe Ryan, who inspirationally asked Anne Farr to deliver the homily for the Just Peace for Gaza. And that kind of theme of Gaza was something that came up again and again. So it was like a good topic or a good theme to have, given the year that we were, the year that was in it, given that we were kind of deeply involved and deeply upset by what was happening in Gaza, and continually becoming even more and more so, whilst at the same time not forgetting Ukraine and all the other difficulties and conflicts that are happening around the world and in different places. Joanna Frew on the Sunday morning told us about rethinking security and offered us a different view of things. And looking at kind of justice and peace on the basis of cooperation and sustainability, and maybe looking at what security looks like for us today. And then Ellen and some of the others had offered wonderful workshops that were based around the theme. And it was really kind of looking at how we can all be activists and as part of a group or individuals that might invest in peace or encouraging others to invest in peace. For example, the Quakers exploring how local interfaith and intercommunal relations in Britain are impacted by international conflicts. So there was this just wealth of reach and wealth of shall we say, contribution that really came together, encouraging us all, as Anne said a few minutes ago, to become these pilgrims of hope during this particular journey. We began really on the Friday night, and the Friday night is often quite relaxed. And indeed, the sisters in place of Rowan really set everything, set the scene really well. And it was quite relaxed in the sense that we weren't being talked down to, we were included in a wonderful conversation. And that kind of fell into further conversation during the Just Fair. And what we have here really, and I'm only doing this to try and remind us, because if we're going to try and talk about a little bit about what stayed with you from your conference and what you liked and what we might improve going forward, just to remind you of some of the different contributors at the Just Fair. Some of them are regular attendees, some of them are new. For example, Mary Ward Loretto, I think they had been there before, but they hadn't been there for a while. But it was a chance for people to chat, to have a glass of wine, people to discuss the work that they do and how it links in with the Just Peace Conference. I suppose really was a chance to kind of bump into people in an informal way, but at the same time to kind of get your bearings and know that, well, when I get a bit of time, I plan on coming back to the Just Fair. On the Friday, if you remember, we had the conversation with Sister Mary and Sister Katrina, and then we had the fair trade wine. Then we had James Truby on the Saturday morning. Then we had the workshop Saturday morning and Saturday afternoon. But we did at a similar meeting last year, where a suggestion came to leave more time on the Saturday afternoon for people to distill what they've heard, to take pause, or if they would prefer to go to another workshop, and that option was there. But if you remember too, there was also the 3 films that people were invited to attend, and they went down very well. Many people had, thought, oh, I'd love to go and see that, and some people did that. Instead of going to a second workshop, maybe they went to see some of that. And then there was the possibility of the Cayley for those who didn't attend the NJPN AGM, which we had straight after tea on Saturday. That was new, and it was at that meeting we decided to put out the reflection on Gaza, or the statement on Gaza. The Cayley group were on then after that, and then others then moved to the bar. On Sunday was really a case of listening to Joanna Frew and maybe coming together as a group to discern what we were going to offer as a next suggestion and as a conference statement, and how we would publish perhaps the work or the conversation or the theme or the effort or what we hoped that would come out of this conference through ICN and others. And Ellen and others were very kindly helped us with all of this. So that was the timetable of events that we had as such. And if you remember the workshops then, just to remind you of some of the workshops, because it was so long ago that it's hard to remember all that we did. And I suppose that was the point of this evening, just to remind you a little bit more of some of the things. So peace isn't passive, doing the work where it hurts, from Alex Cameron from CHIPS. That was the first one workshop. Now, these are not in any order. Linking violence and environmental problems. Ellen, I think, was contributor in that, and Ellen, I see, has just joined us. A Just Peace After Empire. I think that was Sue, or Joanna Frew, sorry, and she spoke on the Sunday. Listening to the heart, listening from the heart to the voices of bereaved Israelis and Palestinians to working together for justice. From Pat Devlin and Kairos. Loud fence workshop, a crafting workshop, different kind of a thing. The violence of poverty, and that was kind of, I suppose, that inspired us later to do our webinar on children in poverty, sharing uncertainties, fears, and hopes. Quaker Truth and Integrity Group, which is Anne Wilkinson, who's also part of NJPN, and then the non-violent life, becoming non-violent people, and what does from Andrew Jackson, and then what does non-violence look like for LGBT plus Christians? And George White offered an inspirational workshop there, and then investing in peace through climate action from Bocani, and then You Decide. Nuclear morality flowchart. So you can see they were the breadth, but you can see that the workshops were chosen to ensure that they followed and fit in with the theme of the conference. So there were loads more that could have been in, and like people might have wanted workshops on lots of different things, but I suppose what we were trying to do was trying to consider the theme and see how can people be able to contribute, but at the same time go away and say, God, I learned something there, or I can pass something on there, or I might revisit this or use that. So that kind of was our conference. And I suppose what I'm going to do now is I'm going to stop the share there just for a second. And the reason being is that we have about 22 or 23 different participants this evening. And we were going to ask maybe that people might break up into groups of 4 or 5. And maybe for a few minutes, maybe for 20 minutes or thereabouts, they might consider, firstly, what it is that give hope at the conference, and then what suggestions you might have for the National Justice and Peace Network Conference for 2026, or then any other thoughts. Now, don't worry if you can't remember all of these questions or any of these questions. We will put them in so people will see exactly what the questions are, and you won't be kind of lost. But we're hoping that in any of the groups that are there will be, let's say there were 4 groups of 5 or 6. Then what we're hoping is that one person might elect to take a few notes, and then maybe we'll come back together. It's 10 to 8 now. So let's say even we came back together at about 8:15, and then we'll try to get a little bit of feedback. So it gives people 20 to 25 minutes just to have a look at those questions. And then we might, and then kind of explain a little bit more about what we intend next for the rest of the year, and then bring the meeting to the close. So you're actually even getting out a little bit early, I would suggest, this evening. So that's a gift for a start. That's just, I don't know what else I can do for you, really. But so what I'll do is, if you give me 1 minute, the surprise will be who you'll be in the group with. But we would encourage you, if you have your camera off, that maybe you might switch your camera back on, and if possible, to contribute in as much as you can to the breakout rooms that are there. So there are, okay, we'll make 5 groups. Sure, that's 4 or 5 participants. And if we had 20 minutes, then that gives, we hope, everybody a chance to speak. And what I'll do is I'll put the questions into the chat so everybody in whatever group you're in will be able to see them. And maybe just to make sure to kind of move along. But sure, look, we'll take whatever comes about. So I'm just going to create those groups now, and we'll see you in about 20 minutes. Open all rooms. There we go. So you've been invited to join a room. We can see all the cameras coming on. That's great. So maybe just nominate one person, take a few notes, and then come back. Those who, yeah, brilliant. Perfect.
seem to have not got into a room.
That's okay. I've just moved you
There
into
we
it
go.
now. Yeah, I've just moved you
Thank
into it now. Hmm.
Thank you to group one. I didn't say thank you before we got cut off.
Mm.
Gosh, there aren't many there. Who's that? Chris. Perhaps Christy. Ellen.
Brian, you muted.
Sorry, I've just been practicing. That's what I was doing for the last second or two. So now that I've got it right, I'll try that bit again. I started by saying you're welcome back from the groups, first of all. I said lots more as well, but I'm not going to say it all again now because I don't want to be boring you. But you saw the 3 questions, and we're hoping that maybe we get a little bit of feedback from all of you with regards to what you thought happened during the year, what you saw and heard at the conference, what might be good suggestions for the conference going forward for next year. But we began by asking first what maybe gave you hope for the conference this year. So there were 5 groups, and I think whatever way they broke up, I think one group had 6, most had 4 or 5, and I noticed there was one then with 3. But I'm hoping that the one with 3 got loads of talking done, and that they're the group would say we didn't have enough time, we wanted loads more time. But anyway, rather than keeping you all, maybe we will ask maybe one group if they want to make a start maybe and just tell us what they heard. So we're not going to write anything down because we are recording it, so we'll capture it all that way if that's okay. Would anybody like to start with what came up for them in their group with others? Sharon, go ahead there. Thanks, Sharon.
Yeah, we were the group of 3 that no one else wanted to join. So
Oh,
Billy no mates.
yeah, we were Billy No Mates. I don't think we actually really discussed the questions, but if I just tell you what came out for us,
That's good.
Susan made a very good point about making more of a thing of car sharing, because she said she arrived at the conference and there was an awful lot of people from the same area that she realised were also there, and she felt it would have been good to make more than more of an effort to try and pair people up to travel together.
Brilliant.
So I think maybe I need to build that into the conference booking form this year, or put it out by email when we send details out. I think that might be quite a good idea if people want to share, that is. And I know I mentioned that the taxi shares via WhatsApp went quite well this year. So maybe we can do something similar with car share. The range of things on offer this year was appreciated, particularly the having more time in the afternoon. But it would have been good to see more people man the Just Fair stalls on a Saturday afternoon instead of just the Friday. As far as next year's concerned, maybe run alongside the Kaylee that we're probably going to have again. Maybe run a good film alongside it. Not in the same room. I mean, in an additional room, just to give something different to do.
Yeah.
Basically, those who don't want to do the Kaylee, because the Family Circle Gaza films were very well received by quite a number of people. And then also just looking at the future of NJPN, really, as Julian said at the AGM, where do we go from here? We need some sort of consultation going forward, really, as to our future. And as our exec members know, we're looking at that anyway. But maybe we need to put more of a formal process in place. And I think that's covered everything. If anyone knows any different, perhaps they can pipe up. Thank you.
You got quite a lot covered there between the car share, the range of items, more people manning the Just Fair, the film with the Kaylee, but not in the same spot or at what happened to be at the same time. The family circles, the welcome for the film, the films in Gaza, and then Julian's question, which is a fair question he raised too at the at some of the workshops and at the AGM, was the future of NJPN and perhaps the use for a consultation, the need for consultation. That's super. So thank you, Sharon. And you might go back and thank the 14 members of your group as well for all the work that they put into that. So thanks indeed for all of that. Is there anybody then who might add to that from a different group, maybe? And if there's something already been said, then that's fine. Who's out there? There's somebody. Oh yes, Anne, go ahead.
Okay, well, we were in group one, and a very friendly group, and we looked first at what gives us hope, and lots of things gave us hope. That there was three young women from Westminster Diocese there for the first time, and they thought it was amazing and got a lot from the conference. But there's also, as well as a number of young people, the wide range of people. Some people were very impressed by the sort of older and very dedicated people who'd been for many years and still had the passion for justice and peace and were really keen to share their experience. Another sign of hope was the Pope Leo, and has him seemingly continuing in the same on the same path as Pope Francis. Another sign of hope were the open conversations and the diversity of opinions. In a culture where conversations are weaponized and or people are ignored, but the fact that there was a possibility of having open conversations with people who had completely different points of view to oneself, particularly on the arms trade, and as Katrina was saying, that was her experience, having open conversations with people who had different views to hers. And another thing was just people. People gave us hope. And then also people being able to step up unexpectedly at the last minute and to share their skills and experience. And that's a great sign of hope that there is a great deal on offer from people who are our members, who are part of NJPN. The conversations that continued all over the weekend. Those were the things that gave us hope, really. And then suggestions, possibly for next year, if there is a possibility of having a good bookstall, a good bookshop, and also toolkits from groups and organisations maybe who have Just Fair stores in the Just Fair or run workshops. If their organisation or group have toolkits for action, it would be really good to have samples or of those available for people. We must consider how we can become more diverse culturally, to see if we could develop a more multicultural aspect to the conference. One of the things that was suggested was that there are maybe young priests from different minority groups who have an interest in justice and peace, and it would be good to get them involved in the liturgy and maybe celebrating the Mass for us. Yes, a celebrant from an ethnic minority. And we also, as well as celebrating the older people and who are long-standing Justice and Peace members, be very much aware of the next generation. And Katrina had a great example of somebody who'd been at the conference then turning up at the arms fair, which was a great thing as well. Another thing we have to consider is keeping the cost reasonable for people and trying to continue with getting outside funding to enable people who can't afford to come on the low income path, and also money for young people. And actually, we didn't get any further than that. I don't know if there's anybody else in the group who'd like to say all the things that I've forgotten.
I think you did pretty well. I mean, considering you were a friendly group to start with, because that's how you began. You began by saying you were part of a very friendly group, and we're glad of that. That's a good thing. And you kind of mentioned you had quite a lot that gave you hope between the new members from Westminster, young people, old people, just people in general, people impressed by the enthusiasm of some of the older folk who were enthusiastic. Pope Leo, the open conversations, the diversity, and that people being able to step up at the end kind of thing, unexpectedly sharing their skills was good. And the conversations, these were all things that gave you hope, which was super. And then excellent suggestions, a bookstore, toolkits, even in the form of a QR code that people could, point their phone at and say, well, we have a toolkit, the SVP have a toolkit, here it is, or Pax Christi have a toolkit, and people could download these and walk away with a resource or a link to a resource. being looking to suggestions of being more diverse, maybe involving younger priests or other priests from different ethnic minorities to be part of JNP, particularly those with an interest in JRP. And also, I think what gave people hope was the fact that you would find somebody who had been to the conference, having been inspired by something they'd heard, turning up at another event afterwards. So that was also very hopeful. So, Anne, thank you indeed to you and to all the members of your group. I'm going to invite Susan to speak. I think Susan has a hand up from that group as well. So, Susan, go ahead. Thank you.
I'm not from that group, but a
Oh,
very
yeah.
quick comment
Go ahead.
about
Yeah.
cost.
Yes.
About costs. At another event that I go to, they really do encourage those that can afford to actually pay slightly more to ensure that they can help finance. And I know there is an option for donation,
Yeah.
but perhaps a slightly more encouragement to those of us who are perhaps in a better place than some of
Okay.
the younger folk. And that might be a way we could just encourage people a bit more.
Thank you indeed. A very generous suggestion indeed, and one that we will certainly take up. Thank you, Susan. We might move on, thanking those in the group with Anne there. Is there anybody else who might like to speak to what came up for them? Anne Kelly? You're on mute, Anne.
Okay.
Oh, you're not. You're much better than I am at this. Go ahead, Anne. How are you?
Right. So there were 4 in our group. There was one person who hadn't been to conference before. So what came out, they found it was a rich experience. I'm not sure we really talked about what gave us hope as such, but what we got out of the conference.
Yeah.
So it's a rich experience, the variety of activities and people, being with people who shared our concerns, and a sense of positivity in a negative world. There was a sense of buzz and enthusiasm, and the idea that we were supporting each other. The fact that we had a strong awareness of what was going on in Gaza throughout, and the presence with some of the different workshops and that. Lots of praise for the session on the Friday night, how natural and down to earth it was, and flowed so easily and naturally. And also with the interview panel, that there were people from different walks of life, and admitting that things aren't always easy, and the people found that encouraging. And then the workshops as well, they were inspired by things that are, different groups are doing. A point was made that it perhaps would be good to show appreciation for the people who organised the conference, that there's a lot of hard work goes into it, and maybe we don't express that enough sometimes. And then we sort of started talking about suggestions, but they're more what I think, again, what they felt worked well this year. On the question of the more free time on Saturday, it was a bit of a balancing act in making sure that the people getting value for money, but also feeling free enough to have other things they could do or just take time to relax. But people were very happy that the ceilidh was reintroduced, and appreciated the varied stalls. There was discussion about the provision for children and teenagers, the fact that that's always been an important part of the conference, and that we've had families where children have basically grown up through the conference. And one young adult who, again, has grown up over many years coming to conferences, saying, well, if mass was like JNP, you'd go to mass every day. Yes. And the point I think someone else made, that the young people there who were saying that they wanted to hear from the older people. So perhaps a suggestion maybe to see more young people running maybe workshops or other activities at the conference as well.
Thank you, Anne, and thanks to the group. You got through quite a lot, and it seems as though some of the activities you can see there's a kind of an overlap. There is a buzz around. There really was a buzz around the Friday night, and that came through. You could feel that on the Friday night. Also, you said that people were very grateful for the effort on Gaza, and they could feel that that was coming through. People like the diversity of the workshops, and kind of the variety of activities and the variety of people. And there's some lovely comments about the fact that JMP Mass rocks, and that young people would like to be more involved, and that young people are happy enough to listen to old people most of the time. Or that they are delighted to hear that there are those who are very much interested in them and interested in passing on what they're doing and speaking about what they're doing. So there is that whole buzz around groups from different and diverse and different age groups all getting together around the same issues. And then you had questions around the free time on Saturday, balancing it with value for money, and that the versus input. And then the Kaylee was a delight. You were hoping the stalls also. And that it was important for provision for teenagers and for children, that we will keep that up, that indeed some had come through from some of the younger adults that are there now had been there as children. Indeed, some of the older adults have been there as children. That's how long NJPN is going. We can see too, I see Sharon has come in to say that they forgot that in their group of 3, that they had considered other avenues or other venues apart from the Haze. And this is a question that the NJPN themselves had. Also, big appreciation for Sister Katrina and Sister Mary Ann's session on Friday. And then finally to say, I suppose, too, that, and what your group came up with, is that we should show more appreciation perhaps for those who were deeply involved in the organisation of all that is the NJPN conference and the other events that lead up to and follow from the conference. So, Anne, to you and your jury, thanks very much indeed. There is no prize, I'm afraid, but you do get our heartfelt thanks, and you get a medal. I don't know what colour it is, but you get a medal. And I can see Susan Murphy has her thumb up in the air, so that's a good sign. So we'll move on. There is another group or two, I think. Anybody like to speak to? Okay, Kevin, thank you indeed.
Yes, and indeed, thank you to the other 3 participants, 2 of whom were relatively new. One was having returned after several years not attending conference, and one was a new attendee at conference. And the reception and the interest that they found when they had returned or come for the first time was very fulfilling in that respect. Their expectations were not disappointed, so I took some comfort from that, that the conference is appreciated by those who attend. A sign of hope for me particularly was the fact that our attendees, the number of attendees, was more than we had expected, and exceeded the number that we had booked. And that's an encouraging sign that NJPN and the interest factor hasn't waned. I think we're doing something right. On the other hand, and this was perhaps a more prolonged discussion, was really about the resourcing and the direction of NJPN in the future. That the world, the church world that we live in, as well as the world around us, has changed from when NJPN was first set up, and that it is perhaps high time now that we reassessed and consulted members that have a vested interest in our progress and continuing to serve the church in those areas which were called the margins, and the impact that setting up CSAN has had on the purpose now, where CSAN is dealing with a number of the areas of charitable help which NJPN has been flagging up for years, and in some sense it shows that what we have done in past years has reaped fruits. But if we are to continue to do that, then we must be looking at how our resourcing allows us to reach the margins, and particularly reach younger people. That the input for JMP doesn't just come from the executive, that we're inviting it from all the areas of our diocese, but the dioceses themselves are not promoting JMP in quite the way they did. So that there is a different world, and maybe funding is part of this, but there was a very good suggestion that what we notice now is that there is not so much in the way of training in terms of justice and peace, Catholic social teaching, and the rest of it. And it's that's one avenue that the church would greatly benefit from. So I'm very grateful, particularly for Ellen reminding me of what I think it's one of my priorities is looking at the future of NJPN, perhaps with a different structure, and certainly perhaps with a different funding stream.
Okay.
I hope that's covered most of the elements that we discussed.
I think definitely it did, and that's not the first time now we've heard that there might be value in looking at reassessing NJPN and who we are and how we do what we do and why we do what we do in the context of a changing world and changing structures and so on. But there's a lot to be hopeful for in what you say. Even the new members, one who hasn't been there for a while and somebody who's new, that they weren't disappointed by the conference. And the fact, as you say too, that there were more who attended than we accommodated more this year than we had anticipated accommodating. So that too was certainly worthwhile. And then the possibility of reaching into the margins and reaching more young people as a way forward. And then, as you say, revisiting the training elements of the Catholic social teaching and re-establishing JMP as a movement by revisiting some of the training and some of the central tenets that we hold dear to JMP. So Kevin, thank you, and all of those who participated in your group. I think we have one more group. So is there somebody there with the final group? Am I right? There is. Anne. Go ahead, Anne. Thank you indeed.
If everybody's happy for me to do it, but they can chip in if I miss anything. I'm afraid we didn't look at the questions, Kevin, basically because, sorry, Brian, because I was looking through for them to come up and chat, and they were coming up across the top of the screen and I didn't see them.
Sorry. Sorry about that. That's okay. Sure, look at
we kind of waded straight in by looking at the order of the conference agenda, basically. And like many other people, were very appreciative of the Friday evening session. And I think the sense that we had was that it gave a lightness to the start of the conference, although things were being said that everybody heard, but they weren't. It set everybody else up, basically, for what was coming next. And I think it led us into a conversation about how do we find the voices that we don't otherwise hear? Because what we've tended to do, we had a conversation about safety, I think, and we were talking about the way that people do things. We were thinking particularly in terms of what was going on in testing nuclear weapons, and the way that people tend to do the same things that they've done again and again and again, thinking that will lead them to safety, when in fact sometimes we have to challenge ourselves and come out of that particular place. And perhaps one of the things that we need to think about is shaking up, like we were forced to do, to move away from the first session being something which is fairly detailed and thoughtful, into bringing people into the conference and talking to them in a way which they could cope with, given journeys, given a week's work, with whatever, and enabling them to hear that. We then sort of moved into, well, would we then go back to having a kind of a much more theological and in-depth presentation on the Saturday morning? And the answer was possibly, but we didn't always need to look for, or did we always need to look for, a recognized name? We knew that it has benefits in the sense that it attracts people to the conference. So part of our conversation was, how do we persuade people of the benefits of the event, regardless of who the speakers are going to be? And then therefore, we can be a bit braver about who it is we're asking to come along and talk to us about things, and think about different ways of doing things. One of the people in my group said that they'd found a workshop at a different event extremely dealing with a very difficult issue had become easier because the conversation was taking place in a craft workshop. So basically, while people were doing things with their fingers, with their hands, making a card or whatever, they were able to have those hard conversations rather than sitting in a circle and looking at one another and expecting something. You actually get deeper and you get a better conversation going about those. So we were having a bit of a conversation about how do we, and it will require a lot more work, but how do we go about fixing workshops in such a way that we may need to change them each year, but they relate to the theme of what we're doing, but we always provide some way for friends or for people to be able to discuss what's going on in their own way. And that's a bigger ask. We then, I think there was a question about what we were planning on doing next year. We talked a little bit about the ideas that had come forward about the idea of doing the just talking. And that, of course, came on the back of what Pope Leo's just said this week. Conversation was very much about, it's not just about talking, it's about listening and it's about dialogue, but we have to find the right wording that will let people know what we're talking about. I think, if I get this wrong, Mary, shout at me, but there was something also mentioned about the concept of moral hazard and work that Durham University's been doing on that, which would fit, or that might fit with what we're talking about. Yet again, there was a loud cheer for the Ceilidh that could, and I think it came back to that, and also to having the time off in the afternoon that gave people the chance just to sit and reflect, but also to talk. And it's a recognition of the unintentional beneficial consequences of giving people time within spaces. You never know what's going to come out of those things. But if you've got a very packed agenda and you're bouncing from thing to thing to thing, you don't get the chance to talk to people, and those individual things that might happen in those conversations don't get to happen. Sometimes they're the most useful thing. So so I think it was basically, one, how do we make the conference important regardless of who the speakers are? Two, how do we bring the workshops more reflective of what we're trying to do within the overall theme of the event and doing them in different ways? And also making sure that we've got time to reflect throughout that whole period. Brilliant. And if I've missed anything, somebody shout.
Thank you indeed, Anne. You captured everything so beautifully. I saw somebody put in the word craftivism, I think, as a kind of a way of describing activism or chatting through craft or during craft work. So thank you indeed for that wonderful summary of your work. Is there anybody who would like to add something else to anything that they've heard this evening, or maybe something struck them as somebody else was speaking, just before we move on to what next over the last, and then we'll close the evening? Does anybody want to add anything to what they've heard? I'm delighted we recorded this because there were so many different good ideas and thoughts and suggestions, and so much even that we can build on, but there's also so much to be hopeful for. Susan, is your hand up there?
Yes, just one quick item that I had already raised outside of this event, and that was about the loss of the veggie loaf principles. And I know some of the explanation, but thinking that yes, people probably were pleased to have more meat in the diet, but the principle was there for a reason. It wasn't just cost cutting. It was to say, to preserve our planet, we should be using less meat. So it was trying to bring that back in some way, and trying to help people to understand the veggie options they gave us were excellent. And the other thing was just to say that as a non-Catholic, and therefore a little bit out of the loop sometimes, I found the reason I come is because I so value the Catholic social teaching and the fact that you do something about it, whereas so many churches, it's something that they don't even think about, let alone do anything. And
I'm really sorry if people feel that this isn't well attended, because I think it's one of the best conferences I ever go to. And I would really like to see some ways that we can encourage people more through the year. Thank you.
Thank you indeed, Susan. It's very heartening to hear you say all of that. And indeed, the points that you make around the love principle are things that are under frequent discussion by the NJPN, and in any and all conversations we have with the Hayes and everybody else, the food and the organization, all of that comes into planning, and you can be assured that people try and put everybody's best foot forward in terms of trying to make sure that would happen. What I might do then, if it's okay with people, I just want to show you one last slide and then we'll close it off with that. It really is a little bit about what we hope to do over the course of the coming year. I'm not sure if you can see that. I'm sure if I show it now, I'll just flick down through, because I thought you'd have seen all of these, but it's really just this particular slide. We normally meet kind of at the end of September, the beginning of October every year, with a plan to review the previous year and to look forward and see whatever. And this year it was very much a case of throwing the doors open in line with the Jubilee year and the thinking and the themes that are around the Jubilee year and what it means to us and what it should mean for us and so on. But over the course of the next year, we've decided that really what we're intending on doing is shining a light in 2026. And tonight really is kind of, I suppose, the first chance for us to share that with people, but it's also a chance to kind of have a little look back on what we've done and to explain to you what we hope to do. And on the 1st of December, in time for Advent, we're hoping to have a Just Peace for the Holy Land. That's kind of the title of an event. Now, we haven't got it fully organised yet, but over the next week, we hope to share an invitation with all of those who have been at our regular webinars to meet with Anne Farr and others on this particular issue of shining a light on what is happening in Gaza at the minute. And it's open to all, in particular those who know very little about Gaza, and also to those who do know quite a lot. So it explains the issues and then also tries to follow on by explaining what's happening now, and of course then what we hope for. In February, we intend to organise an online event using some of those who are attached and who are affiliated to NJPN as part of our grassroots. And that's an important feature this year, that it's not going to come from the centre out. Effectively, we're going to gather our grassroots and help them put their best foot forward across the platform of the webinar or an online or an in-person event using our own membership. So it's reaching out to the grassroots and helping us to shine a light together on these various issues. And one that we have been constantly asked to do something about is standing up to racism, given the incidence of the rise of the right and the marginalisation and the hostility of welcome from those who are from different places. Then we're hoping in April to run a kind of a food event around intercultural food and also food, as Susan had mentioned, around the love principle and sustainability and living sustainably and food security and insecurity and all that's entailed in there. We thought then an all-night vigil might be something we might consider doing. It could be for peace or others, but we'll come to that, and we're hoping that we might have a number of members who might sit on the hour, every hour for a few minutes, and we keep the Zoom open for the whole day. So these are all things in the planning. Then we have the conference next July. In September, we're hoping to have an in-person event with CAFOD. And then in October 2026, just like tonight, to have a conference roundup. And that's kind of, but all of this will be on the website and you'll get to see it. So that's just kind of a little bit of thinking around what we hope to do next. And that kind of brings us to a space where you've kind of had an idea of what we've done, of what we're doing, and it also kind of gives us a chance to have a little think. So to thank you is not enough at this late hour, and I know it is late, and I know I did say 8:30, but it was 9, I think we said. So you are getting off 10 minutes early. There is no homework that you have to do, so you can go to bed early. You can even take the day off tomorrow if you'd like. But I'm going to hand back to Anne, maybe who'd like to say a few words. And at that, then what we might do is with your support, we might close off the evening, and we will send on a kind of a summary of what came out of this as good suggestions and reasons of hope for everybody. So, Anne, I'll hand back to you if that's okay.
Basically, the most important thing I have to do is to say thank you. Thank you to everybody for turning up and sticking with us. And you'll be relieved that it wasn't the 4-hour stint that Brian promised us at the beginning. Thank you very much for being part of this evening's discussion and for sharing your views and your opinions openly and honestly. Thank you, Brian, for facilitating the evening. and for preparing the PowerPoint and for everything that you do for NJPN. It's really appreciated. And thank you to all of you who are key to the success of the conference before, during, and after the event. You are truly gifts to your own communities, to your churches, and to your wider community. So thank you very, very much. And as Brian mentioned, this is the start of a process of looking to see where we should be moving and how we should be operating in the future. I'd just like to make one point, not a controversial point at all, but in relation to CSAN, from my experience over the months since the conference and also before the conference, I would say that there is definitely room for both of us. That we're two very, very different organisations. We are a really grassroots organisation working from activists who are actually working on the ground. And there is a real place for us because we can reach into places where highly structured organizations perhaps find it a little more difficult. So I would say there is certainly a place for grassroots people coming together and sharing their expertise and also their hopes and fears for the future as well. So please don't give up on the grassroots. They're very important. And that's where the things get done. We have to change the system from a top-down model in every aspect of our society to where local groups and individuals are listened to. And that will be part of our next year's conference, all about dialogue and who's talking to whom and who's listening to whom. So once again, thank you very much for joining us. And I hope you'll be part of the process of moving on and moving forward. And we just had a comment from Julian about the gender makeup of our panel, if you like, our group this evening, and we need to think about that. So thank you very much to everybody, and good night and God bless.
Thank you, Anne. Okay, thank you all, folks, and thanks indeed. Take care.
Good night.
Take care. Thank you indeed.
Thanks.
Thanks,
Good
Fran.
night.
Take care.
Good
Good night,
night.
everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Good night.
Annette is sitting
Sleep
in
well.
Australia in her garden. It's beautiful trees there. All right, take care, folks, and thank you all very much indeed.